Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to day 2 of palette week, reinvented essentially. Palette week last week was a bit of a fail, but today we are going to be going through my palette collection. I recently depotted a few shades from some palettes that I wasn't like 100% sold on and just put those in my Z palettes. So my palette collection has gone down just slightly, but I still do have 75 palettes in my collection, which I know sounds insane, but I love my palette collection, and as of right now don't plan on decluttering anything. I do have some plans for next year. I'm going to be doing a quarterly palette roundup recap where I talk to you guys about palettes that I did not use within the last 3 months, and if I didn't use that palette, I'm just going to declutter it and not think about it to try and help me only keep palettes in my collection that I am truly getting at least some use out of, and keep my large palette collection as curated as a large palette collection possibly can be. So this is my palette collection, and I'm going to be going through each palette with you guys today. It's been a while since I've done a palette collection video on my channel. If I can find my previous palette collection videos, I will link those below for you guys in case you love palette collection videos and are interested in checking those out too. Those will be in the description box. But other than that, let's just jump into it because this is going to be a long one. So let's start at the left corner, which is mostly my Z palettes and like my Sephora Pro palette. So I'll just grab all of my Z palettes first. So grabbing my Z palettes first, I do have 3 Z palettes here. I'm so excited about this one. You guys, I'm obsessed with camo, so I had to have this one from Tarte. It was only $10. It just has it has a ColourPop single and some Makeup Geek singles in here. Maybe some Anastasia Beverly Hills as well, but a tinier Z palette. And then I have this really messy Z palette. So I recently I recently depotted the entire Meet Matchmaker palette, and that is what all these little guys are on this side, and then we just have some more miscellaneous single shadows. And then finally in this last Z palette, again, a bunch of miscellaneous shadows. Most of these are Makeup Geek shadows. I don't really know what's going on with this palette right now. I would like to dabble more in single shadows next year rather than just go ham on eyeshadow palettes, just because there are some indie brands out there that I would really like to try their eyeshadow palette formula or eyeshadow formula. So if you guys have any good recommendations on some indie brands who have bomb single eyeshadows, leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear your guys' recommendations. So then continuing over on that side, I have my Sephora Pro. This is the editorial. I just felt like I needed a colorful rainbow palette in my collection, and this one just happened to be the one that I picked up. Now, I don't hate this palette, but I definitely don't get a ton of use out of it. I do really like the bottom row. The shimmers are so beautiful. I'm just a little bit hesitant and scared to play with some of the more vibrant pigmented shades, but my goal next year is to kind of master my craft a little bit more and step outside my comfort zone when it comes to techniques that I'm doing with eyeshadow, as well as just the overall color schemes that I'm playing around with. So I'm so happy to have this one in my collection. The quality of this feels super luxurious. It was a very expensive palette, but yeah, definitely not one that gets a ton of use from me. Way up in the corner, we had my Jaclyn Hill Morphe palette. This is the 35 pan eyeshadow palette that she created with Morphe. I will be honest, I have barely reached for this palette this year. I'm just not reaching into these large palettes that often, and even though this doesn't look that intimidating looking into it because it's mostly just warm neutral shades, I just feel overwhelmed every time that I look into this. It's almost like I just have too many options and I don't know what I want to do with all of them. So I really don't reach for this palette that often, but still one that I want to keep in my collection, at least for the time being. Okay, so then I have 6 Juvia's Place palettes, starting with the littlest one. This is the Nubian Mini by Juvia's Place. This is what this guy looks like. I actually really dig this palette. It's really nice just when you're looking for like a simple, easy, wear to work, wear out, just to run errands type of look. But you can also put this like red shimmer all over your eyes and make it more smoldering. I don't know, it's just a really nice friendly mini palette, very easy to travel with, and I really enjoy this one. Then I have the Saharan palette, the original one. This is what this looks like. This used to be a lot more intimidating to me than it is now. I actually want to pull this back out and play around with this. I love the top row. I think it's super fun. And then I love how the second two rows are a little less intimidating, a little bit more neutral. I know that this shade looks very vibrant in the pan, but you can blend it out to make it look very wearable. So I really do enjoy the Saharan by Juvia's. I love the quality on Juvia's palettes in general, and if you can wait for a sale, you can get these palettes at an even steeper discount. So I think that the Juvia's palettes are definitely worth the investment. I also have the Saharan 2. This one might be my least favorite of all of my Juvia's palettes. I find that this shade specifically pulls a lot more pink, whereas in the pan it looks like a cranberry red. It looks a lot more pink on the eyes, which was a bit of a disappointment to me, but I still do really enjoy these two brown mattes, and I think this shimmer specifically is very beautiful. I also really like this shimmer, but of all of my Juvia's palettes, I would say that this is probably my least reached for and least favorite. Then I have the Deuce palette, which I love. I have Pan going in one of the shades in this palette, and I just think this is a really fun palette. Looking into it, it's a little bit hard to kind of decide what you want to do. It's not necessarily, in my opinion, the easiest to look in and be like, oh, I know what I'm going to do today. But the more you play around with it, the more you find other palettes in your collection that pair nicely with it, and you can really create some beautiful, especially springtime looks with this, with some of the pinks. I love this Tarte shimmer shade, and I also really enjoy Mont Blanc. I think that this is a really nice matte shade, and I actually was surprised as to how much I really ended up enjoying the Deuce palette. Next, I have the Nubian 2 palette, which is super dirty. This is one of the palettes my daughter has gotten into and straight up destroyed. This is like one of the last remaining very destroyed palettes, but I refuse to get rid of this because I just really love some of the shimmers in this palette. I love the shade Egypt. I love this shade up here. Sheba is beautiful. The mattes in this aren't mattes that I typically reach into or use a lot, but I just love this palette for the shimmers. I should probably at this point just buy a replacement because this just looks so bad. It looks so bad, but I do really enjoy this one as well from Juvia's Place. And then the final palette I have from Juvia's is the Magic palette. Now I will say I have not played around with this too much, but I really have loved every time I have gotten to reach into this. I reach into this more for the shimmers. I've never created like a full, actually I think once I tried to create a full look with this palette. This one can be a little bit intimidating just because it is so colorful and you don't have too many mattes in here, but I still think it's a beautiful palette and I just love the shimmers. This shade right here is one of my favorite shades I think in my whole collection. I also just really like these like three right here. I think that they are absolutely stunning. I wish I had waited to get the mini palette. I bought this before the mini had been released. This is another just like, it's a really bulky palette, but I'm still very happy to have this in my collection. Next up, I have a couple palettes that I only own one from each brand. So up first we have the Smoke Sessions palette by Nabla Cosmetics. I've talked about this palette quite a bit recently and just said it's not your everyday wearable palette, and I knew that going in, but I find that the mattes are just a little bit too grungy for me and end up looking almost the same every time I blend them out. They just end up looking like a dark like gray black shade, but the shimmers are stunning. I just typically have to pair this with another palette. I usually just go in for a lid topper with one of the shimmers. I'm still happy to have this in my collection, but I definitely don't get a ton of use out of it. I am really interested in trying some of the other palettes by Melt. I know I really have my eye on the, I think it's the Gemini palette, correct me if I'm wrong. And then a couple of their newer releases have been just calling my attention as well. So if you have any palettes that you recommend from Melt, leave them below. I would love to hear from you guys. And then I have this one from Butter London, which I received in a BoxyCharm. And when I first opened this palette, I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was pretty lackluster. Didn't really, you know, wow me or catch my attention. But I love Enchantress Queen and Diva specifically. I think they're really beautiful shimmers to just pair with a neutral look. Star, I have not used. Femme Fatale, I also have not used, but I have used Temptress, and it blended out pretty nice. So even though it's not like a palette I think you need to go out and buy, it's a nice one that we received in BoxyCharm. I definitely don't keep all of the palettes that I receive in my BoxyCharms, but this is one that I am excited to hang on to. Moving on to the 2 Urban Decay palettes I own. First, I have the Naked Reloaded palette. This is one that I ended up purchasing this year, or rather my husband purchased this for me. I thought I was gonna like this one a lot more than I ended up liking it. This is just okay in my opinion. The quality is just subpar. There's some definite dud shades in here as well. I really was disappointed in this Angel Fire shade. It's very, very chunky and just not a favorite of mine. I do really like the shade Bucked. I think it's a really nice transition shade. I also really like the shade Reputation and Burn. Endgame is okay, but I wish that there was like one deeper shade between Bucked and Endgame to help blend the look together a little bit better and create more of a gradient. So this palette is just okay in my opinion. Not one that I really recommend unless you are like an Urban Decay lover and a neutral loving type of gal. I don't think that you need this in your collection. And then I also have the Urban Decay Born to Run palette, which I really, really do love and enjoy. As you can tell, I have pan going on this shade up here, which is in the shade Rith, and some really good dips going in some of the other shades, as well as a couple of nail marks. Yikes. Sorry about that, you guys. I think that this one is so nice, especially for your everyday, like average makeup user. You are offered so many great options for neutral shades that you can go super neutral with, or you can amp it up with some of these like mid-toned darker shimmers, and then you have these fun pops of color too if you want to experiment with color. But I just don't find that this palette is intimidating, even though there are 21 shades and some pops of color. I feel like this is just such a user-friendly palette, very easy to travel with. I love that you have this big mirror, and I love that you can also flip the thing all the way around. I don't know, I personally just really appreciate that. So I'm very happy with this Born to Run palette from Urban Decay. Okay, moving on to these two. First up, I have this one from Marc Jacobs. This is the only Marc Jacobs palette I currently own. I used to own the 2017 holiday palette, but have decided to declutter that. This is like the blue-green 7-pan palette. I purchased this, I think, in 2017 when I was just like buying anything and everything just to purchase this, and I thought I was gonna love this, but hello, this just is not your everyday wearable palette. I am going to try and pull this and try and get some use out of this. This shade is stunning, and I think I could really get on with these last 3 shimmer shades. I just don't see myself getting a ton of use out of these 2 blue matte shades, but I've barely even given this palette a shot, so I really need to do that and decide whether or not I want to keep this in my collection. And then I have this one from Zoeva. This is the Cocoa Blend palette. This is what it looks like. Basically just your everyday basic palette. I know a lot of people really love these palettes, but for me personally, I found it to be a little bit lackluster. The shimmers just honestly are like nothing on the lids. I find that they're a little bit more of a dry formula. Now I do really like these 3 mattes, and I like to put this shimmer all over the lids. It's more of like a satin shimmer. Nothing is like a foiled shade, and I will say I was let down by this palette. I was very excited to try this out, and I just found it to be subpar. I do obviously have a good dip going in this shade right here, as well as this one right here. So I could definitely see myself getting some pans in this palette, but definitely not one that I would repurchase or really recommend to anybody. Yikes. Okay, we'll move on to the 3 palettes that I own from Dominique Cosmetics. Starting with this little mini Celestial Thunder. This came in a BoxyCharm, and I was so excited to get this in BoxyCharm because I had been considering purchasing the Celestial Thunder palette. Now obviously it doesn't have all the shades that came in the Celestial Thunder, but I think that this is such a nice palette. I did try and create a look the other day with this, and I loved it up until the point that I tried to use Mystic Ice on my lower lash line, and it just was a disaster. This Fireball shade I am obsessed with. I also really like Ethereal Light, and these three blended together create a beautiful, beautiful gradient. So I really am excited to have this in my collection. I was so excited when we got it in BoxyCharm, and I am just very happy with this one. Then I have the Rustic Glam palette, which I purchased kind of midway through this year. This was definitely a purchased on a whim palette, and what I'll say is I think that the quality in this is okay. There's definitely some shades that perform better than others. I find that this Wildflower shade isn't too pigmented and takes a lot of building. I find that this Cactus shade seems to oxidize a little bit, and I just don't love the way that that one blends out. It's a little bit patchy, and then I also have just a little bit of issues. Like, I just have to take a little bit of extra time when blending out Fringe, Suede, and Desert Queen. Now, the foiled shades in here I really like. I love this Wanderlust shade, as well as, I believe that says Bohemian. Moonchild and Gypsy, could have taken them or leaving them. Evil Eye and Dreamcatcher look very, very similar on the lids, and so really these three right here I would just probably skip over, and then I just am never really reaching for a bright blue. I knew that going into buying the palette, but I loved the idea of the Rustic Glam. I loved the packaging. I know that's not a reason to buy something, but I'm just being honest. That is part of what drew me to this palette, as well as that green shimmery shade in Wanderlust, because I've just been so into green shimmers. But I'm not mad that I have this. Would I recommend this? Probably not. I feel like you really don't need this in your collection, but I'm happy still to keep it around. And then I just recently added this one to my collection. This is the Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette, and you guys, I love this palette. This is so good, especially for your everyday neutral loving gal. It is amazing. The shimmers are so easy to work with. They create this beautiful foiled look without having to use a wet brush. The mattes blend out so easily, and you can just get such beautiful looks. And then I love how you have your pops of color just to add some fun to the palette, but I think that this is a knockout palette in my opinion, and I am so happy that I finally added this to my collection. Alright, we're zoomed in a little bit more and focused on everything else left to share with you guys. So let's just jump into the bottom row, my ABH palettes. I do have 10 of these. So starting with this one right here, this was the ABH Prism palette. This was the Holiday palette, I believe 2 years ago. This is what it looks like. This is a very interesting palette, a little bit more finicky to work with. I do still think it has some really unique shades. I do like the palette. It's definitely not something I reach for on a consistent basis in the least, but also something that I still think adds value to my collection, and I'm very happy to have. Okay, I adjusted the light a little bit. Here's my ABH Riviera palette. This is likely my least favorite of all my ABH palettes in my collection. I purchased this at basically when this launched this year, and I thought I was going to love this a lot more than I do, but I just don't find this to be the most cohesive palette. I don't feel like it makes a ton of sense. And I feel like it's a little bit more difficult to work with, kind of difficult to think of a look to create. Part of this could be because I'm not a makeup artist. I'm not super, super creative, even though I like to think I'm kind of creative. When it comes to makeup, I'm like, I'm not creative at all. So I just have a tough time with this one. There's a few shades that I like, but I wouldn't be sad if this one suddenly disappeared from my collection. Then we have the ever famous Subculture palette. I personally really do like this palette. If my camera could focus, I like this palette. Again, I think that this one has some very interesting and unique shades. I love the color story of this palette. I find that this does add value to my collection. I feel like there are definitely some unique shades to this palette, and I've created some looks that I really do like. I just know going into this palette, it's not going to be something I reach for on like a day that I'm flying out the door or the day that I'm going to work. I know that this is going to take some time for me to create the look I want. I know it might be a little bit frustrating and that the formula is a little bit finicky, but I do still enjoy having this palette in my collection. Next up, we have the Norvina palette. Again, a palette that I like, but wouldn't be mad if this suddenly disappeared out of my collection. I find that this palette is just a little bit frustrating. I feel like none of the shadows perform on the eyes the way that you think that they would. It just seems like the shadows in the pan don't match what actually ends up getting onto your eye, if that makes any sense at all. And I do find that the shimmers in this palette specifically just seem to be a little bit more chunky than I find a lot of ABH shimmers to be. There's a ton of fallout with these shimmers, and I think it took me like less than 10 uses to hit pan on this Dreamer shade. So I just find that the shimmers or the glitters in here are just chunky and kind of annoying, so not my favorite ABH palette by any means. Next we have the Sultry palette, which I wasn't originally going to purchase, but I am really glad that I decided to pick this palette up. I just think that this is such a unique palette. I could do without this Bloom shade as well as Fresh and just trade them out for other shades, but the shimmers in here are outstanding. They are beautiful. I also really love this Twig shade. I think that this is just such a stunning cool tone brown shade, and I'm really glad that I ended up deciding to pick up this palette. Next up we have one of my favorites. This is the ABH Soft Glam palette. I just think that this palette is so easy to work with. I find that the color story just is cohesive and makes sense. I just love everything about this palette. This is everything that I feel like I wanted Modern Renaissance to be. I like that this isn't as pink toned or as red toned, whereas it's just more like neutral orangey brown shades. Love the shimmers in this. I think that this is going to work for such a wide variety of people. This comes traveling with me all the time. I just think it's such a phenomenal palette. One of my favorite palettes in my collection. Would definitely replace if I lost this. I just think it is so good. Next we have Modern Renaissance, which I do enjoy and like. I mean, you can see my palette is very messy, dirty, and just wow. I like this palette. Again, it's just a little more red and pink toned than I typically like to go for. I usually kind of stick to this half of the palette. I have loved the looks that I've created when I've created looks with this side of the palette with like red ochre and Venetian red, but they're just not like wearable to work. They're just not like wear to work looks. So if I'm doing that, it's usually because I'm going out or I'm filming. So I just don't reach into this a ton anymore. And I definitely prefer some of the other ABH palettes I own over this one. Alright you guys, and this is one of the newer ones to my collection. This is the ABH Jackie palette. And I am obsessed with this. I can't get enough of this. I think this is an amazing palette. There's not one thing I would change about this palette. I think it offers, it's like a non-intimidating, colorful palette with neutrals in it as well. I just think this is one that would be amazing to travel with because you've got your neutrals, but you also have your pops. It's just such a cool palette. I think it was very well thought out, very well curated, and I just can't say enough good things about this one by ABH and Jackie. Then I have the ABH Carly palette, which is the newest one to my collection, and I've been enjoying this. I wasn't originally going to buy this. Do I feel like I needed to have this in my collection? No, probably not, but I love this shade Jody. I love Libra, Mandala, Bybel. Moo is pretty, and then I mean I know I can get some good use out of the bottom row for work appropriate looks, so I know I'll get use out of this palette. Is it the most inspirational color story of all time? No. But I also feel like a lot of people could get use out of this just because, again, there's neutrals and there's non-intimidating pops of like color and like cool tone shimmers. So overall, I think it's a cool palette, cool concept. Is it my favorite? No, but I am happy to have this in my collection. And then my final ABH palette is the Master palette by Mario, which unfortunately you can no longer get. This is such a phenomenal palette. I love this guy. As you can tell, mine is very messy. This Muse shade shattered on me, so I had to repress it. That's why it looks exceptionally ugly. Lula, one of my favorite cool toned transition shades ever. But I just love everything about this palette. I love that it has a variety of cool and warm tones. I just think, again, very well thought out, very well curated. I feel like this is just the perfect neutrals palette for just about anyone. So I am so glad to have this in my collection. So bummed that you can't get this anymore, but I'm so glad I have it. Okay, next we can move on to all my Huda palettes, starting with my only larger Huda Beauty palette. This is very new to my collection. It is the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. This is so beautiful, you guys. And what I love about this one is when you look at it in person, it actually does have quite a few neutral shades. And I know it has these pops of potentially intimidating shimmers and colors, which are stunning, by the way. You can still get away with this as a neutral palette, which I absolutely love about this. I just love the whole concept behind this, being inspired by Mercury retrograde. I just think it's such a fun palette concept idea, and I love this palette, you guys. So then moving on to my 6 original Huda Obsessions palettes. First, I have the Gemstone Obsessions, which looks like this. I actually really do like this. I actually do like this for lid toppers, so I'm happy to have this in my collection. Then I have Warm Brown Obsessions, which looks like this. Very pretty, especially for the fall time. Next, we have Mauve Obsessions, another favorite of mine. This is what this one looks like. Very, very pretty. Then we have Coral Obsessions, which I really love in the summertime. I've created some really pretty looks that I was like kind of surprised by out of this palette, and I really love this one. My favorite Huda palette of all time is the Smoky Obsessions. I just love the cool tone shades with this. I travel with this all the time. I don't have enough good things to say about this palette. If you were to purchase one Huda palette and you like cool tones and smoky eyes, I highly recommend this one. And then finally, the last of the original 6 is the Huda Electric Obsessions, and I actually really like this one too. This is just a fun, small, mini 9-pan eyeshadow palette that has your pops of color. It's like a mini rainbow palette, and I think it's so much fun, and I love it. I love this purple shade as well as this blue shimmer. I think are really, really nice, and I've just had a lot of fun playing around with this palette. Okay, so then I also have the Huda Beauty Emerald Obsessions palette out of the Gemstone line. I also used to have the Amethyst palette but decluttered that. This one is not my favorite. I do find the quality in the Gemstone line to be not as good as the original 6. But I also picked up the Huda Orange Neon palette this summer, and I really do like this palette. I think it is beautiful, stunning, and just so fun for the summertime. Highly recommend this one. And then recently I picked up 2 of the 3 nude palettes. I picked up Medium and Rich. I just was not a huge fan of the light. It didn't inspire me that much. But this is what the medium one looks like. Very, very pretty. It reminds me more of like a mauve toned pink rather than like a true nude palette. But still really love that. And then the Rich one looks like this. Again, very like mauvey pinky toned, but I love both of these. Quality, I would say, is very similar to the original Huda palettes, and I think that they're stunning, beautiful. These Huda palettes are so easy to travel with. So easy to travel with because they're so small and compact and just very easy to create looks out of. So I can't recommend the Huda mini 9-pan palettes enough. Next, let's jump into the 4 Tarte palettes I own. So I own the Tartelette in Bloom, which you guys have heard me talk about so many times on my channel. This is what this one looks like. Very well curated, very well laid out. I love that this is more of like a cool toned palette. It's just so, so pretty in my opinion. Obviously, I have pan going in 4 of the shades and some really good dips going in other shades. I will say the quality of mine is definitely not as good as it was when I first purchased this because I have had this for about 3 years, but I still love this palette to this day. And then I have the Tarte Toasted palette, which I was going to declutter but decided to keep. Not my favorite palette by any means, but it's, you know, it's wearable. It's fine. I can deal with it. I do like some of the mattes in here, so I'm going to keep this around for a bit longer. Then I have the Tarte Unleashed palette, which was released this year. I purchased this one on a whim, and I love this one. I think that this is stunning. I especially like the top row of mauves. I've done some really pretty looks with that. I also really like these 2 shades right here. They're very vibrant and beautiful. I also really enjoy this shimmer shade. The only shade that was truly a letdown was this shade right here in the shade Hawkwood. It's just a little bit chunky and has like no base to it, so it just doesn't come off like I was originally anticipating it would. But other than that, I really do enjoy this one from Tarte. I like that you have the bigger pans, and I've gotten quite a bit of use out of this year. And then finally, I have this one, which I picked up last year. This is the Tarte Love, Trust, and Fairy Dust palette. This was limited edition, so I don't think that you can get this anymore. But I really like this one just because I like mauve tones personally. Mine's a little like chunked out. And as you can see, I have a pan on this shadow. I do want to reach for this a little bit more because it's been a while since I've reached for this, but I think the quality on this is really nice. I really like some of the shimmers up here, so I highly recommend this one from Tarte, even though I know you can't get it anymore, but I'm really happy to have this in my collection. My one and only remaining palette from Too Faced is the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. I used to love this palette. I haven't gotten much use out of this palette this year, but I really love this Luscious Shimmer shade, and for some reason just cannot get myself to get rid of this palette. I need to pull for this more often though, so perhaps I'll pull this into a Shop My Stash, or fingers crossed it'll get rolled for my Pan Those Eyeshadows project, but this definitely has not gotten much love from me this year. This is my one and only palette from Nabla Cosmetics. It was the Volume 1, and I really do like this palette. I love this shade up here, and I also do like Lacoste. I think the shimmers are really beautiful. I also find the mattes are very easy to blend. It's a little bit of an intimidating palette just because you only have the 8 shades, and for me, I just feel like for the most part you'd be creating bolder looks. Oftentimes I'll just reach into this for either the mattes or for these shimmers at the top, but I will complement it with another palette. But overall, I'm really happy with this palette and very happy to have it in my collection. Then I have the Colored Rain Queen of Hearts palette, which I do really enjoy. I love the color story in this. I love that you have matte browns, but I also love that it has the touch of like mauves and purples. The shimmers in here are stunning. I'm very happy I finally decided to pick this up. It took me so long to finally bite the bullet and buy this, but I do feel like this added a lot of value to my collection, and I'm very happy to have it. This is my only palette from Ace Beauty. I got this in a BoxyCharm, and I actually really do like this palette. I love the shade Cinnamon and Patchouli, and then I like to top it with either Primrose, Myrtle, or Jasmine. I think the shimmers in here perform really well with a dry or a wet brush, and I think the mattes blend really nicely as well. So overall, I am really happy to have this palette. All right, you guys, we are getting down to the last little bit here. Here we have the Violet Voss Essentials palette. This is something that was sent in BoxyCharm. I actually decluttered the other 2 Violet Voss palettes that I had in my collection. I had the Holy Grail as well as the Like a Boss palette. I'm just not uber impressed by the Violet Voss formula, but I am going to keep this. I've used it maybe 2 times. I'll give it a chance. I liked it the couple of times that I did use it. This is a really easy palette, I feel like, to just create looks out of, just because there's not a ton of options. This one's easy for me to create looks that I can wear to work, but then I love that you have your fun pop of this green emerald. So overall, I am going to be keeping this for a while. Okay, then we have my BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. I believe this is my only BH palette, but I love this palette. I do have pan going in the shade Boho, and then I have some good dips going in other shades throughout this palette. What I love about this palette is that you can do neutral looks, but then you have all these pops of colors, and the quality on this is just so good. Especially, it was only $18. I'm just blown away by the quality of this. I love the looks that I've created from this. I feel inspired when I reach into this palette, and I just love it. This is currently the only palette I own from Pier. This was sent in BoxyCharm, and I actually really do enjoy this palette. I really love these 3 mattes, and then this whole top row of shimmers I think are stunning. I've used the purple shade a couple of times, and I like it. I just don't reach into shimmery purples that often. I have not played around with Wild Child, and I don't believe I've used any of the pressed glitters on my eyes, but I really like this palette, especially for the summertime. It's just so like blazing warm neutral that I just love it. Next up, I have Milani Bold Obsessions. I also really love this palette. I think this is a really nice one. Lots of neutral transitions. I do have a little bit of pan going up here. I don't know, there you can probably see. And the shimmers in here are just outstanding. I really want to pick up the cool toned version like this, just because I've been really into cool tones, but I think that this is a nice one if this color story speaks to you. So this is my Milani Bold Obsessions. Then I have this one from from Studio Makeup on the Go. This was another BoxyCharm palette, and I actually really like this one. It's this beautiful cool toned purple palette. I recently depotted the other one that I had from Studio Makeup on the Go, which was more neutral to warm tone browns, but I decided to keep this one in the palette because I really like all of the shades within this. I need to pull this into a Shop My Stash and use this again because I remember really loving this one. Then I have these two from Nabla. First, I have the Poison Garden palette, which is my least favorite of the two. It's just not the most inspiring color story ever. I thought that it looked a lot more inspiring when I saw pictures online. Some of the mattes, the darker mattes, are a little bit more difficult to work with, and I also felt like this Subliminal shade just took a little bit of like building up, and it feels like there's already hard pan there. So I'm going to continue to play around with this one, but overall I am not too impressed by that so far. And then I have the Nabla Secret palette, which I actually have been very impressed by. I'm very inspired by this color story. I love that you have your mauve neutrals, your just neutral neutrals, and then you have this fun middle row with like blues and purples and this amazing like transformer shade, which I am obsessed with. So if you are looking to pick up a new palette from Nabla, I would recommend the Secret palette. I'm also very interested in the one that they just released, but I don't know, I've had hit and miss with Nabla, so I'm not too sure about the one that just released. The color story looks beautiful, but I don't know. What do you guys think? I only have 3 ColourPop palettes remaining. The first is the Perception palette. This is a favorite of mine. I love this palette. The shimmers in here are outstanding, and the mattes perform just like any other ColourPop matte. So I love this palette. It is not going anywhere. It's such a good palette. I don't know if you can get this anymore, but if you can, I highly recommend this one. Another favorite palette from ColourPop, and one of the favorites that I have in my collection, is the Dream Street palette in collaboration with Kathleen Lights. I just feel like the color story in this was just very well curated. I love this. I love that you have your neutrals, your beautiful like champagne-y shimmers, but then you have these fun pops of like blue and like an aquamarine shimmer down below, which I absolutely love. I just love the looks that I create when I reach into this palette. So that is the Dream Street palette. And then this year I picked up the Baby Got Peach palette by ColourPop. I haven't played with this a ton, but the couple times that I have, I've really enjoyed the looks that I've created with this. This is the only monochromatic palette I have owned from ColourPop, and so far I'm impressed. I would say that the shades within this palette perform very similarly to all the other ColourPop shades I have played around with. I love the shimmers. The pressed glitter doesn't even bother me too much. I just feel like you're limited to very corally toned looks with this palette, but I'm not too mad about that, and I'm really glad that I got to try one of the monochromatic palettes. Alright you guys, then I have the Persona 1 and 2 palettes. This is the original Persona palette. I love this palette. It is one of my favorites. The shimmers in here are just knockout, and the mattes perform so well. This is just such a stunning palette. This is another one I really do like to travel with. I like that this one can lean a little bit more cool, and it's just a beautiful palette. And then the Persona 2 was one that I picked up this year, and I love this palette. I love this because you can create your everyday neutral sort of looks, but then you have your fun pops of color, which just aren't intimidating to me at all. So this is a really nice palette, really high quality. I think Persona really knocks it out of the park with their shadow formula in general, and I love the new hard packaging in this, so highly recommend both of these from Persona. I have this 6-pan palette that I picked up last year during the holidays. This is what this one looks like. This palette is okay. I mean, it's not like the best palette I've ever used. However, I do really like all the shimmers in here, and the mattes perform nicely. It's just, it's so expensive, you guys, to purchase Pat McGrath, and I wasn't like completely blown away by this. Still happy to have it in my collection, and I kind of wish I had picked up the 2 other 6-pans that they offered that year. I know you can get them now, but I believe I got this palette when it was half off at Sephora, which is kind of how I could justify the price. But yeah, I have this one from Pat McGrath, and then I also picked up this mini Pat McGrath earlier this year. Now this one I definitely did not need. I paid $48. This came in a collection with the Fetish mascara, which was truly awful, and then it came with one of their like eye toppers, which I could definitely do without. So essentially I paid $48 for this little mini 6-pan eyeshadow palette, and these don't offer any of those special shades that Pat McGrath is known for. The shimmers in here are just more of like a very intense foiled shade, which they are beautiful, but I feel like this isn't like a one and done palette. Like, you don't really have a neutral transition. You just have this darker brown and then you have the black to build it up. And then you obviously have these foiled shimmers, but not a favorite of mine, but not something that I'm ready to part with. And then the newest Pat McGrath palette addition to my collection, which I'm so excited about, is this Bronze Temptation palette. I have loved playing around with this, you guys. The special shades in here are just so beautiful. I love the matte shades in here too. I think that they did a nice job picking complementary matte shades, and overall the color story in this palette is just, it just speaks to me on another level. Now, these are obviously very expensive eyeshadow palettes, but I have no regrets about purchasing this and bringing this into my collection. I'm so happy to finally have one of the full-size Pat McGrath palettes, so that is that. I have 4 of the 5 pan eyeshadow palettes from Dose of Colors. This one is Marvelous Mauves, which I think is stunning. I personally really like the 5 pan eyeshadow palettes from Dose of Colors. I also have Blushing Berries, which looks like this. This is probably my least used of all of the ones that I own. Next, I have Big Browns, which is probably my most used. What I will say about Dose of Colors eyeshadow formula is you do get a ton of kick up, so please bear that in mind. If you are not a fan of that, you will not like this eyeshadow formula. And then I also have Sassy Siennas. This one truly is so beautiful. If you love warm toned eyeshadow looks, I love using this one in the summertime. It is absolutely stunning. Really glad that I picked this one up. This was the last one that I ended up picking up from Dose of Colors. I was very hesitant on whether I needed this because I had Blushing Berries, but the two of them are not really similar in the least, and this one isn't very similar to Baked Browns either, so I really enjoy all of my Dose of Colors 5 pan eyeshadow palettes. They're also very easy to travel with. And then also from Dose of Colors, I have the Friendcation palette. I also love this eyeshadow palette. I think that it is absolutely stunning. The mattes in here are so easy to blend, one of the easiest formulas I've ever had as far as mattes in the like level of easiness in blending. I don't know what I'm trying to say. And then the shimmer shades in here are just unlike anything else. They are truly foiled, especially with a wet brush. It's just so stunning. You can also layer the shimmers in here to create different colors. Like you could layer the red shimmer with the blue shimmer to create a purple shimmer. It's just a super unique palette. I truly don't have anything else like it in my collection, and I'm so happy to have this. All right, and then we will finish off with Natasha Denona, and we'll start with my 5 pan. So this is my only full size, like larger 5 pan eyeshadow palette. This is the original Cranberry palette. Now I know that they have reformulated. I will be honest, I don't get a ton of use out of this. I just was a little bit let down and disappointed by this palette, but I continue to hang on to it. So then I have 3 of the mini Natasha Denona palettes. My favorite would be this one right here, which is the Natasha Denona Mini Nude, but I also have the Mini Gold right here. Beautiful. I love the shimmers in this, and then the matte, the like brown matte, I would just take out the like poopy green matte and then the shimmery dark brown shade. And then finally I also have the Natasha Denona Star palette. I like this palette. A little bit bummed by the shimmers in here. I don't think that they perform like Natasha Denona true shadows do, but I do like the way that the mattes blend in this one, so not something that I want to declutter, but probably the least quality in terms of actual quality of the 3 minis that I own. And then my sister gifted me the Natasha Denona Gold palette this year, and I have really been enjoying my time with this. I haven't gotten a ton of use out of it. Now I do have pan on that bottom shade. I've been super focused on that, and I've had some fun with this shimmer right here as well as this one down below. But other than that, I haven't got a ton of time to play around with this palette, but I'm really excited to keep this in my collection and play around with it because it is a palette that just sort of speaks to me, so I love this one. And then the final palette to share with you guys in my collection is the Natasha Denona Lila palette. Here it is right here. I love this palette. This is truly what made me fall in love with Natasha Denona shadows. The shimmers are just so beautiful. The dual chromatic shades are truly what steal the show for me. I love the entire bottom row. The mattes perform super well, and I am just so happy to have this palette in my collection. Unfortunately, it made me really love Natasha Denona shadows, even though they're so expensive, but I'm very happy to have this in my collection. Alright, you guys, we have an empty bread spread, meaning we have made it through my entire eyeshadow palette collection. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what some of your favorite eyeshadow palettes are within your collection. I would love to hear from you guys. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video, and I will catch you in tomorrow's palette week video. Bye, you guys.